Okay, so now let's continue. So I've imported the seaweed. So it's the seaweed that we did a couple of episodes back. And as I mentioned before, there's two ways you could shade this. We could shade this either just with the extruded stuff, but keep in mind we're going to have a ton of these seaweed pieces later on. So we can also shade them another way, and that would be just like with splines. So let's make a null inside our seaweed. So copy your seaweeds in here and just make a node here called out and put it towards the these splines. And let's hide this and let's make a geometry node. Put down an object merge and object merge the curves into here. So what we can do is we can let Redshift generate this geometry at render time. So that's what we're going to do. So call this, I guess, rndr underscore seaweed, right? Let's make a material. Called seaweed. Let's apply it to our seaweed. Let's go to our out node. Let's make a new rob called seaweed. Put the seaweed in there. I guess we could keep the sun, see what it looks like for now. Let's just guess which cam are we going to use. Let's just use the second cam, whatever. Right. Let's just let's put something like this. Where is the sunlight that we had? Let's see. Sure where it's located, but whatever. Let's just let's turn off this in the viewports. All right, let's just render and see what it does. So let's click seaweed. And you see nothing is happening. Well, that's because we need to tell Redshift how it needs to render these splines. So if we select this thing, maybe also color code it green, so we're sort of, and am I in the correct? Yeah, okay, it's the correct one. So set selected, go to Redshift object, and you can see a tab called strands. So there's multiple things we can do. We can render strands and we can render particles. I'm also going to show particles a little bit later in this video. But let's enable render strands. So let's press reset. It's building this scene. Let's see if something will actually happen. So not much is happening yet. Okay, let's put in a underlight. Let's just put the HDRI for now. Let's push the HDRI and let's turn down the tessellation, so it's going to be a little bit faster. All right, let's reload. All right, and there we go. So now you can see we have our seaweed. So let's on this thing, let's go to IPR. And let's enable sub-level updates. So Redshift, IPR, and then sub-level updates. If you do that, then you can see it will also move when we move. So that's nice. All right, so let's start doing some material stuff. So let's move out a little bit. And what I maybe want to do is I want to put a light behind our thing, because I want some subsurface scattering on this thing. So I kind of need a light so I can sort of see what I'm doing. So I'm going to put this sunlight here. And I say that, okay, you should use the sunlight as well. Okay, maybe if I only use the sunlight, what does that look like? Okay, no, let's not do that. All right, let's just start playing with these materials. The material is probably going to be quite simple. So let's do a material. All right, let's make it green. Okay, so there's one thing we can use. We haven't used it yet. There's something called backlighting translucency, and that's sort of to be able to fake like sort of subsurface scattering-ish. So you could use it for something like paper as well. So maybe if I want to show that maybe a little bit easier, let's just make a grid. So let's put a grid here. Let's put it to something like this. Let's apply this material. And let's render this thing. Okay, so I am going to disable the light dome. Just gonna use the light. Now it's gonna be super dark. Maybe you want to make the grid a little bit smaller. All right. So let's go into this thing. Let's go into the light sun, by the way. Let's enable the sun, right? Else we won't see anything. Let's see if we can, if this will actually show. So let's give this another color. Let's give it a separate color. So it's not too obvious, but if I increase this, it will sort of get this look as if the light is shining through it, similar to something like what subsurface gathering would do. So you could use it for something like paper or something, but we could also use it for our seaweed. So let's put our seaweed back in here. Right. So you can see this makes a super big difference from going from super hard to maybe something like this. So you could also, of course, use actual subsurface scattering, but I mean, for this seaweed, I think I did end up using that in the final render, but just with this backlight translucency should be good enough for what we're going to do. So maybe do like a slightly different color. So maybe something like this. Let's turn down our sunlight. All right, so we have some settings as well on the seaweed. So we have, it takes a p-scale by default. So we can also decrease the p-scale value here. So I think we need to reload in order for this to take effect. So let's reload. So you can see we make it a lot thinner. So yeah, this is looking pretty okay. So now let's do something that we haven't done yet. I mentioned the velocity before. So if you press this button, like if you remember, we added velocity on our seaweed. Let's see if we also have it on this one. Not sure. Yeah, we did it here. So this adds velocity. So we have, if you go in Geo spreadsheet, we have velocity on our thing. So we can use that to render stuff. We're also going to do that later, but this is our first object that we have that's going to be animated. So we're also going to do this on our squid. By the way, maybe we want to increase our resolution a little bit. So let's go over here. Let's make the cam 1920 by 1080. See a little bit better what we're doing. All right. So what we can do is we can go into this seaweed thing here. We can go into settings. Then you have here deformations blur from velocity, and then it asks you for the velocity attribute. So it's on the Redshift object settings. Okay. enable it. Nothing happens yet. We also need to go inside the ROP. Go into Redshift, motion blur, and then enable motion blur, and let's enable everything. So also deformation motion blur. And now it's probably very subtle because it doesn't move that fast. But we could, I guess we could increase this. Let's increase the frame duration so we can sort of see more what's going on. So you can see if I increase the frame duration, then you can see what's happening. Like it's blurring based on the movement. So of course that's not what we want, but we do want this motion blur. So it's very subtle in this case, but like in some cases, if something moves faster, then you do want something to, yeah, to sort of, well, have motion blur, because that's what makes stuff realistic, right? So that's how you enable motion blur. So you can also turn up the steps, which we're not going to do this for now, but you need that if you're doing like particle simulations, for example. All right, so let's maybe render a little sequence and see if we have the flipping issue, because we probably need to fix that, because we're not using the sweep anymore. If you remember, like they were like flipping over. All right, so let's go in Seaweed. Let's go to shot. Let's go to type /tests or something. Type Seaweed. Let's make this $f4.exr. Let's render a couple of frames and see what's going to happen. So let's just render. Let's render 60 frames or something. And remember, because this is all set up properly, we should now be able to press render, and then it should end up in the correct location. So let's render. Oh, probably I'm going to do this for the test. I'm probably just going to turn down the resolution again because it's going to render faster. We can also do that instead of the camera. Like I mentioned before, we can also do it in output here. And then in main, I can say override, and I can say half the resolution. Right, so let's just render half resolution. And press render to disk. Well, we probably want to close our render view first, because else it will keep the old frame. All right, now let's really render, and I'll be right back when it's finished. You can see this is quite fast. Okay, so it looks seems to look okay. And apparently we don't even need the orient in this case. As long as it has an up vector and a normal. Apparently Redshift also seems to be okay with this whole thing. But again, if you have issues, you could also enable the orient thing that I explained in the Seaweed. But yeah, so this is a very nice moving Seaweed. So apart from that, not that much we can do with this thing. We can add a little bit more variation if we want to. We could what we could do is we could add another rest position. So we could say that we need to add a time shift. So remember, we need a rest position needs to be static. So we could say that you want to copy the rest. So let's see, geometry spreadsheet, rest, okay. So then we could use something like a triplanar texture to like use like a maximum noise or something. We could throw that into the diffuse color instead, for example. Make that like a bit dark green. Again, we're gonna change these colors also when we're doing it in the actual final scene. because right now it's hard to judge how it will look in the scene without the whole context of it. So I guess we could say let's make one color red so we can actually see what we're doing. Be smaller. Like that. All right, that is okay. You could do something like this. So yeah, and then we got a moving seaweed. But yeah, again, you could play around with this settings to make it look different. So one more thing I want to show you, because I showed you now how we can render these as a strip. By the way, you can also render it as, for example, a cylinder, or you could render it as a box. But yeah, so it has a whole bunch of stuff. So let me also show you how you can render points. So we're not really doing that anywhere, but since we're on the topic, I might as well show that. Let's make an empty geometry node. Let's make a box. Let's do ISO offset, scatter some points in there. And so we have some points. We can go into, let's go to out. Let's, in our seaweed, put our geo1. And on this thing, let's go to the particle rendering tab and enable render objects as particles. So it needs a p-scale. So let's do attribute randomize. Let's randomize p-scale attribute. Needs to be 1. You have a scale multiplier here, so let's just put it to 0.1. Probably needs to be a little bit smaller. Let's have a look. And there we go. Rendering points. And again, we can also just use other attributes in here. So we could say that we want to, let's just make a material. Could go in here. Load an attribute. Because then you can use these attributes in your shader any way you want. So you can say, let's load p-scale. Do a ramp. Let's just put in some colors. I don't know, something like that. Let's assign this to our spheres. Something like that. Let's press render. And for some reason this is not working. So let's have a look. P-scale. Let's have a look in our thing. P-scale. View. Okay, so that is working, but why is it not doing anything in the shader? Okay, yeah, in this case, this doesn't work with the ramp because this doesn't have UVs. We could do it differently then. We could say that we need to do we're gonna do a color ramp from attribute, or we can just do a random color. So let's do a random color. Let's remove the ramp here. Let's type CD in here. And then you can see we get the random color from this thing. We could change the seed and then colors would change. This is how you could like render points and stuff. So that's super fast as well. All right, so anyway, so now we know how to render a sequence. So again, like this sequence is now on our disk somewhere. So let me go to this to the location. So render 3D R&D test seaweed. So our seaweed render will be there. This always takes a while to open, but I can see that's here. So yeah, that's how the seaweed was done. Now all that remains for the for the regular part of the course is shading the squid, and then after that it's on to the exclusive part of the course when we're gonna put the whole thing together. So this is going to be a super exciting couple of hours when we're going to put everything together. But let's first do the squid.